Last week's was not quite recorded, so my apologies on that. Let's see. So we are working with the question of meaning in life. This is our last session. So straightforward, I just do it by point. And the first point, today's session is more hopefully practical, designed to help you to find your meaning in life. And obviously, no one can come and tell you what your meaning and purpose is. We can offer hints as to how to discover what God might want from you, but it's more of a subjective / spiritual journey. And so with that, let me start off by encouraging you. We need to move from existing to living. So we need to move from existing to living. So I'm in the middle of this book. It's called Creating a Life That Matters by Freeman and Goldstein. And they draw a distinction between existing versus living. So that they say existence are things that take up objects, so that takes up space, or objects that take up space, so that things that exist are there, they occupy space, and as we know, two objects cannot occupy the same space, so that if you try, into accident. So that's the primary definition is something that takes up space. But it's not just objects, but it's your thoughts, right? You're occupied with thoughts. There are things on your mind. And generally, you have one thing on your mind. Now, you can have another thing on your mind, but it replaces. In other words, we don't have multiple things on our mind at once in the same space. In fact, if we look at our brains, our beliefs, the thoughts that we have occur in certain areas of our brain. So that even thoughts are things that exist. They take up space. And in the very beginning, when God created, God didn't create a thing. He created space. He created an area of which things could exist. But one of the things that Freeman says about existence is existence requires certain conditions to be fulfilled in order to exist, so that you need to eat or to breathe or to have air. But he says life is our effect on our world. It is what we do with our existence. So that when you look at fire, right, it warms, it cooks. When it look at water, it wets, it causes things to grow, it quenches thirst. So that you have existence and you have life. So the primary question is not what is the meaning of life as much as what is the meaning of our existence. The way you live your life is the answer to the question of the meaning of existence. You may never have sat down and asked the question, what is the meaning of existence? But all of you have an answer, whether it's explicit or not, by the way you live your life. So that the question, this is the question that we have to ask. Are we simply taking up space, or are you truly living? Now, last week, working off of last week, every purpose statement that you have for your life must have an element of helping someone else in order for it to be weighty, for it to be significant, for it to be relevant. I would argue that Jesus came in order that we might have life in this sense, life and to have it more abundantly, to live with purpose and to live in such a way that we leave our mark to make a difference in the world in which we live in. So that when Jesus says, what shall it profit a man? He should gain the whole world and lose his soul. To gain the whole world is the language of existence. To lose your soul is to have existed without truly living. So that I would argue that existence is the language of the body, right? It's what you eat, what you wear, what you drink, the home, the car you drive. Fullness of existence is happiness. That's why happiness is fleeting or it's up and down. But life is the language of the soul. It's the fullness of life is joy. That's why we draw a distinction between happiness and joy. And the Bible talks about joy far more than happiness. Because Christ didn't come into the world to make us happy. Of course, there are moments of happiness, but he came into the world that we might have life. And life that leads to joy always includes, that'll be my last point, it always includes suffering. You can never truly live without suffering. It's like trying to give birth without pain. That's why the Bible uses the imagery of birth so much. So existence and life. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, consumerism is the obstacle to life. Why aren't we living with life of purpose as much as we want? Because of consumerism. If you ask me what is the number one challenge to Christianity, I don't think I would say it's political. I think it's consumerism. What a time in the world, a time of the year for us to think about. How many of you bought presents of galore? I mean, our Christmas tree underneath, right? You got, whenever I go downstairs 2 weeks before Christmas lobby, I have Amazon boxes just stacked up, and they come multiple times throughout the week. Because unless you shop, you might quite not know who you are, right? This is Descartes' famous statement, I think, therefore I am. We are reduced to the activity of shopping because I am what I wear. I am what I drive. We see this on Good Friday, in the beginning of the Christmas season, as it's almost a war, or it is a war, as we go out looking for the very best. Because there's something about shopping. I don't know about you, but people who are depressed, sometimes there's comfort food. There's comfort shopping, right? There's window shopping. Because even if you don't spend the money, there's just something about looking at something that's bright and new. And how many of us go into Apple stores and just walk around and then walk out feeling so good? Well, unless you buy something, I guess, sort of. You have to buy something. Just sort of also our price range. I find Oprah a contradiction. She is... Some have called her the high priestess of our culture because she is the guru of spirituality, and yet she is the major proponent, one of the major proponents of consumerism. Even today, you'll see the list of Oprah's favorites, 25 top favorites, right? And people go out and they buy these things online. And then, I don't know if you had the TV show. What TV show am I talking about when she gives away something big? Oh, you all watch TV. I know you do. When she gave away a car, do you remember? Oh, I have the YouTube clip, but I could have played it. But what she did was she brought out what is it, a Grand Am or one of those? It was American car. They brought it on stage, and then they gave everyone in the audience, 243 people, little boxes, right? And they said in one of those boxes, the key to this car. If you open it and the key is in there, then you win the car, right? Everybody is holding it. And then they open the box, and in every box there's a key. And they're all going nuts. And she's like, you in a car, you in a car. You know that one? There was like a meme? No? Okay, just pretend. So that you have an audience who is in ecstatic. I mean, I'm not picking on her. You tell me I got a brand new car out of nowhere, and holy cow, my face will look like that as well. Is there anything better than life? Than when you wake up and your wife has bought you a brand new car with a ribbon on top. How many commercials have you seen? Because life is about shopping. In fact, that may be our national religion. I would say Christianity is more defined by our consumerism than by spirituality. In fact, we have consumerized our spirituality. So that as we develop and grow, we have become consumers rather than human beings. Because every time I move, I realize how much stuff I got cramped all over the place, right? Every time I move, I have stuff coming out of nowhere. I didn't know my house was that big to have that much stuff, right? And usually we're moving to a bigger house so we can have more storage so that we can... And we throw all these things away. My wife and I, we throw all the things we don't think we need, and then we move to a new home, and before I know it, it's all filled up. Do you know there are more more self-storage places in our country than Starbucks outlets? Wow. Because we own so much stuff, most of which we do not even know we have. What is consumerism? It is a social ordering, let's say a cultural mindset, which fosters a desire. It operates on a level of longing. That's why commercials and advertisements are so wonderful in creating the desire for goods and services, that's possessions and comforts, in ever greater amount. There is no end. There is no end. So that consumerism is what fuels capitalism, what keeps it functioning. So that, if all of you decided, I'm going to stop shopping today, some of your neighbors will lose their jobs. Right? Because unless you spend, the world doesn't turn. As the world turns, because we shop. You have to shop. If you don't shop, you are a traitor. Because your country will not function. The next iPhone that comes out, you don't buy, I bet you stocks will go down. You won't have as much of a retirement. People will lose jobs. Listen to what Shaw says. Shaw says, look, in fact, essential to the efficient workings of capitalism. On a surface level, consumption is the form of accumulation that ensures that the capitalist machine keeps working. Consumers accumulate in the form of commodities. Yeah, you know what I realized? I walked to the kitchen. I have appliances in the kitchen that I didn't have 20 years ago. I mean, who heard of an air fryer? Right? Coffee beans. And there's stuff all over within our kitchen. Producers accumulate capital, which they invest to accumulate more profit. This insensate cycle, and it is a cycle of accumulation and production, results in the proliferation of goods and services. With the Industrial Revolution, we are now able to make things cheap enough where even the middle class and some of the lower middle class can enjoy the fruits of consumerism. So that when the 9/11 occurred, that's really interesting. Look at that. After 9/11 terrorist attacks, President Bush didn't call for sacrifice, he called for shopping. Get down to Disney World in Florida, he said. Take your family and enjoy life the way we want it to be enjoyed. Because if you don't go down to Florida, our capital system will break. As he told Congress, I ask your continued participation and confidence in the American economy. Translated, go shopping. And this is the problem with shopping. Consumerism creates opportunities for distraction. We live in a world of distraction, a life of distraction. It is more so. Blaise Pascal said, I think in the mid-1700s, early 1700s, he said, we are distracted from our distractions by distractions. I have never found that quote more relevant today than with our phones. Hard to focus. Can't read any book longer than 200 pages because we're so distracted we can't finish. Consumerism creates opportunities for distraction to keep us from a life of purpose. That's its design, so that we don't live for meaningfulness. We want to exist. We don't want to truly live. So that we become like the rich young ruler when he heard that Jesus called him to give everything away, to the poor and follow me. It became very sorrowful because he had such great possessions. How many of us identify more with the rich young ruler than Peter, who gave up his vocation, family, and home to follow Christ? That's the second point. If you're buying too much stuff, you'll never live a life of purpose because you don't have enough focus to even reflect deeply about that question. The third point then is the Sabbath is rest from consumerism. Sabbath is the antidote to consumerism because it enables you to explore purpose. Now, when I say Sabbath, don't think just Sunday. Sabbath is far more than Sunday. It is a period in time in which we can break this cycle, right? You go to work to make the money, to spend the money, and then you go into debt, and then you go to work. See, it's a never-ending cycle, and Sabbath is that hammer that you bring and you shatter that cycle. Because we live in a consumer-oriented society probably more than any time in history, and we are 4 times as more likely to go shopping than our Western counterpart in our world. So that we Americans gobble up more of the resources of our world and probably contribute far less proportionately. And so what God has done is he has instilled Sabbath rest. And Sabbath rest is not being lazy. It's not sitting on your sofa watching football. It's to abstain from consumerism by purposely not thinking about your existence so that you can think about your life. This is why when manna was sent down from heaven, you don't collect on Sabbath. Because you're not supposed to worry about your existence. It's about life and what God has called you to do. We used to have blue laws. You know what blue laws are, right? Where you didn't go shopping on Sundays so that we could think about life and we can connect. They used to say that before the blue laws were eliminated, people could always connect with other people because there was always a day that was free for building relationships. You ever try to get together with a friend these days? I mean, you got the calendar and you're trying to work out where to. But Sabbath, when blue laws were still in effect, Sabbath, Sunday was always free to connect with people. And then it's to be still. It's not shopping, but when you don't shop, you have all this time. Any of you fasted? Okay, yeah, thank you. Some of you fasted, right? When you fast, you ever realize how much time you have? Because you're not prepping and then cooking and then eating and cleaning up, which takes up so much time. So when you fast, one of the first things is, wow, I have so much time in a day. It's supposed to be that way so that you can think deeply about life. And Sabbath is not shopping, but being still so that you can ask the question, God, what is it that you want from me? We are in this deep cycle, but life is far more than work. I told you last week the 5 things that people who have terminal cancer, they have regrets about. One of those is that they spent more time in their office than with their family. Life is about giving. That's joy. So the Sabbath is intentional time set apart. It doesn't have to be all of Sunday. So if you're starting off, just set apart 3 hours on Sunday. And it doesn't even have to be on Sunday. So in many ways, Christians have become so busy on Sunday doing things at church that's really not a Sabbath. Set apart 2-3 hours, sometime during the week, and say, Lord, I dedicate it to you. It's intentional time set apart to examine our lives. Right? As my wife shared, the unexamined life is not worth living. That's not from the Bible. It's from Plato. He's right. You got to examine. In the light of our existence, how am I treating my body versus how am I treating my soul to discover, to renew our sense of purpose? And we have to do this regularly because, as I shared several sessions ago, you have this mission statement, which is same for every Christian, right? Every Christian should be seeking the kingdom of God or making disciples of all nations. But your personal purpose statement, in line with your mission statement, can change depending upon what stage of your life. So that in my early time in school and I'm studying, it's to be trained. When I was teaching at Bible college, I'm training leaders. Now I'm at church and I'm equipping a church. Later on, I may be a palliative chaplain, following the steps of my daughter. Who knows? The other dream is to go to Thailand and teach in one of the English-speaking seminaries as an adjunct professor. Purpose statements change. Mission statements never do. What if God has something different for you? That's why you need to keep asking. Some of you have transitioned to retirement. Retirement is not freedom from purpose. Retirement is not just about traveling around the world, and I hope we all get to do that. But retirement is a renewed sense of extra time where you can devote all of the experiences that you got for the next generation to raise them up. Remember Israel when they went into Canaan to fight the battle, and Joshua, it says, and there was a generation that arose that did not know God. I don't blame that generation. I blame the generation of the parents who have failed to train them. We need retired people. Hearing God's voice in a chaotic world means that we have to find a place where we can block it out so that we can hear the voice of God. And then to point 4, hearing the call from God requires learning to walk with God. Perhaps that's the most important point, because if you say to yourself suddenly one morning, I want to hear the voice of God on what my calling is. How do you recognize the voice of God when you haven't walked with God? You have to walk with him to learn to recognize his voice. It's like Jesus coming to the sheep pen and say, my sheep, they hear my voice, they recognize it because they're around me all the time. So I recognize the voice of my wife. I don't even need to hear her voice. I can project thoughts into my wife's mind. And I know what she'll say because I've heard her for over 30 years. I recognize. And if you come and tell me my wife said this and it doesn't connect with me, I know it's not from her. You have to walk with God, to recognize that it is God who is speaking to you, learning to hear his voice so that every single day as you walk with him, the chance that you will recognize his voice when he speaks to you is far greater. We hear God most clearly in the context of a relationship. With the better we know God, the easier it is to recognize his voice. Because if you remember Samuel and way in the beginning, right? God called Samuel, and Samuel didn't recognize his voice. So he goes to Eli and said, hey, here I am. Did you call me? And after the third time, Eli recognized, oh, Samuel is hearing from God. He goes, go back. And Samuel did not yet know the Lord. But walk with him for a few years and you begin to recognize when he speaks to you so that you can hear what that calling is. Point number 5. God's calling is greater than our weaknesses. Now, I want to be careful here. Nothing that God calls you to do, you can do in your own strength. But whatever God calls you to do, it can't be so easy that you don't think you need him. There's a balance here. I get this from the story of Gideon when the angel came and called him, and Gideon had all of these excuses. I can't do this. I can't save Israel. And then Moses, when he's called on the burning bush, he's got all of these excuses because God has called them to do something far greater than they recognize their ability. And I think that's one of the things that we recognize the voice of God, is that it makes us feel small. And so we persist. When we hear the voice of God and we know we can't do it, we don't quit. Yeah, one of my favorite stories. At first she didn't succeed, but she tried and tried again, 960 times. Tried what? Tried getting a driver's license. 960 times. This woman failed. And she happened to be Korean. Oh, man. Asians can't drive. Push the stereotype. For 3 years, starting in April 2005, she took the test once a day, 5 days a week. And after that, her pace slowed to about twice a week. But she never quit. I can tell you something about this woman. She really wanted that driver's license. I'm proud of her. I just don't want her driving near me. When we get that calling from God, I think it's going to be greater than what we think we can do. And God is there to strengthen us so that we don't quit, whatever it is that we start. Never quit. I went to Word of Life for 1 year. The only thing I remember was the speaker that came in. He said, never quit in doubt when you started in faith. Oh, what a statement. What a statement. You know, when you go running in a race and you see this uphill, there are two kinds of people. There's one kind of runner who says, oh man, a hill. I don't want that hill, man. And then another kind of runner who says, oh, a hill. This is great. I'm going to run up that hill because it'll challenge me. Two kinds of runners. Two kinds of obstacles. One's a threat. One's a challenge. A threat causes fear. I go up that hill and I may not finish the race. Challenge brings courage. I really want to do this because it's going to push me and it's going to make me a better runner. See, it's a mindset. It's your mind that has a certain attitude that when you hit obstacles, the first thing you don't think of is, oh, I'm going to quit. It's, oh man, I'm really going to grow. I may fail. I may have to walk up that hill, but I'm not going to quit. It's the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset by Carol Decker, one of the huge help bestsellers. A fixed mindset says my capacity is established, it's fixed, so that I can only go so far. When I hit the limit, I stop. But a growth mindset is there is no limit to my growth. I can push my capacity beyond what it was so that you can always do more than you thought you could. Growth mindset sees obstacles as challenges. Even when the whole world says you can't. Did you know that everyone said you couldn't run a 4-minute mile up to, I don't know, about the late 1940s, early 1950s. My family, one of our favorite books is Unbroken. I don't know if you've seen the movie or read the book, but Louis Zamperini is a runner. He's trying to break the 4-minute mile. I think it was a 4:12 or so before he was captured. And they said it couldn't be done. And now 12 high school students so far have broken the 4-minute mile. You know, the world will tell you, it can't be done, it can't be done. But if God has called you by faith, he will give you the strength to do what he has called you to do. Roger Bannister being the very first one. There's a saying by Nietzsche, and Nietzsche, my favorite philosopher, he says we tend to call other people geniuses so that we can get ourselves off the hook. Think about that. I love this statement. So I'll read what he says and then talk about it. Because we think well of ourselves, we all want to think we're good, and nevertheless, never suppose ourselves capable of producing a painting like Raphael or a dramatic scene like one of Shakespeare's. We convince ourselves that the capacity to do so is quite extraordinarily marvelous, a wholly uncommon accident. In other words, Mozart, and he probably was, you're born a genius. I'm not born a genius, so I am relieved of the burden of trying to become one. So Nietzsche says, thus our vanity or self-love promotes the cult of genius, for only if we think of him as being very remote, he's unlike us, as a miracle, does he not aggravate us, makes us uncomfortable with the half-shoddy work we've been doing. Genius, too, does nothing but learn first how to lay bricks. Then, this is what Nietzsche says. Genius always starts from ground zero, and you work your way up. I don't think Paul was a religious genius. There are a number of people who have given him that label. But he worked hard. And he says he has suffered a number of times in 2 Corinthians 11, and then 3 times, right? He's got the thorn in the flesh. I pleaded with the Lord that it should leave me, but he said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. See, that's why every calling you get from God is beyond your natural abilities, so that at some point you have to say, I can't do it on my own. And the grace of God comes forth. And when you finish, people don't come up to you and say, good job. People say, how in the world? And you just point to God, right? Let your light shine. And when they see the light, they don't come and say, wow, you're a good person. You want them to point to God and give glory to God. Point 6, second to the last point. God's calling utilizes our life experience, talents, and passions. I don't believe God calls you to a purpose of which you hate that particular activity in which you are called to do. It's consistent with the story of your life. So every life here is a story, right? And when we're born, it starts off, and then when we die, it ends. And it flows in one direction, and stories have this rising action with a climactic moment, and then you have the falling action and it ends. So good stories require tension, which means every calling that you have for your purpose has obstacles. That's the tension that it produces. Will he get over it? Will he succeed? And the tension requires obstacles, so that every good story has troubles. You ever have a story that doesn't have any trouble? I guarantee it won't make any money. It won't sell. Because you have to have some tension, and tension is only produced by obstacles. And there are 2 implications. Our stories can be comedies, so comedic, and then you have tragic. So that if you look at this diagram, right, this is a cycle of a story. We used this last year. You start off in this initial ideal state. You have some tragedy. This is a trouble, which causes some type of unideal state, this place where you don't want to be. Redemption is the resolution of that tragedy. So that in the very end, at the end of the book, you have the repetition of the initial ideal state, but it's better because the character has developed through this tragedy. That's comedy, ending better than the beginning. So Lion King, and I use this all the time, Lion King, right? You have the beginning, you have the king, and then you have the tragedy, the death of Mustafa, and then Simba hits his cause, and then you have chaos, you have redemption. In the very end, you have a new king, but it's better because the new king has learned what it means to be a true king, sacrifice. But this is a tragedy, cycle of tragedy, where that second part is not found. so that you end up with the unideal state, so that the ending is worse than the beginning. So that if you were to do that with the Lion King, you would end up with Scar on the throne in a world that is in chaos. That's implication number one. The beauty of the gospel is that all of our lives will be comedies. At the very end, our lives will always be better than the beginning. And that's the story of God, and that's the story of us. There's a second implication, and this is the structural integrity of stories. Stories need to be tight. The structure is defined by the plot line, and the events within the story must push that plot line. So that when you have these scenes in your story, it has to push the plot line. But if you have stories where the scenes are out here and you're thinking, how did that fit? How are they going to make that fit? It doesn't really fit. See, that's sort of like, I use this illustration all the time. It's sort of like the summer blockbuster with all the special effects, but the storyline isn't tight. They're getting the special effects to drive the story. And then in these tight structures, scenes flash back to each other and they foreshadow each other back and forth. Just sort of like the Bible, the Tower of Babel, Pentecost, back and forth. So the primary author is God, who crafts their story so that the scenes are structurally fitted. This means that our calling is in line with our past scenes, our experiences, passions, strengths, and weaknesses. What am I trying to say? If God gives you a calling in life, a purpose statement, it's in line with your story so that it fits narratively through that plot line. It doesn't come out of the blue. You're wondering, what in the world? He uses your experiences, your gifts, and your strengths. Last one. God's calling always costs. There's always a price. There's always a price. So that the joy set before him for Christ to fulfill his purpose, there's a cost that is involved. Every calling requires a form of dying. Why? Because existence in life is a zero-sum game. The more you focus on life, the more you'll lose on the existence side. And the more you gain on the existence side, the more you will lose in life. It's a zero-sum game. Right? You work less so that you are not so consumeristic. You're going to lose on the existence side. But you're going to have a lot more time to devote for your calling. That's the lifestyle. It is a zero-sum. You can't have both. You cannot have both. I know there's certain denominations that say you can have both, and I think that is an atrocity to the Christian faith. You have to suffer to fulfill your calling. Last slide. This is King David. No, but I will buy them for the full price. He's offering the sacrifice to the Lord. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor burnt offerings that cost me nothing. It's going to cost. Now, I understand these are not answers to some of the questions that you might have on finding your purpose in life. Hopefully they'll give you some clues, but it is a journey that you have to take on your own and to walk through it and work through it. Any thoughts, questions? Yes.
Have you read Brave New World?
Yeah.
You must have. Yeah. The feel, one of the sense I get from the book is that it uses consumerism to enslave people. And even before birth, people are
Yes.
repeated phrases. One of them is, the more stitches, the less riches. And I think the modern equivalent to that is there's a trend. It's out there. It's called the Great Reset. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about a future where you own nothing, you rent everything, but it's all consumeristic.
Really?
And they're talking about a central bank digital currency. It's super convenient. And what they do is they try to bait you in with the convenience of digital currency, but they track you everywhere.
Right.
And yeah, there's a Forbes article where the World Economic Forum wrote, this guy writes an article about life in 2030. It starts out with, I own nothing and life hasn't been better.
It's amazing.
And it's all consumerism.
Right. Mm-hmm. Just following on the comment on the second half, how consumerism has penetrated into the bedroom.
Yeah.
I did all my Christmas shopping sitting on my bed. I mean, it's there right in front of you 24/7. Before, you actually had to go to the mall. Now the mall has come to you. And in most cases, 1-day delivery, at most 2-day if you have Prime. Yeah. Brave new world. Yeah, Charles.
I think near the beginning, I think you said something about like our faith, Christianity becoming more consumeristic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess to me, it sounds like you're saying that not just that consumerism is a distraction to our faith, but that our faith itself is becoming more
Yeah.
consumeristic in nature. I was wondering if you could like elaborate on that or explain what you're seeing there.
So, look at the average gospel presentation, right? If you have faith, Christ died for you, you will have eternal life. I don't see any language of discipleship, calling, purpose, nor suffering. To me, that's consumeristic. You do this, you get this. And that's the basic gospel presentation. So that we're like salespeople, right? You pay this and you get this, and this is better than anything else you can get, right? So that if you win a lottery and you get $500 million and you have faith in Jesus, you're going to die one day with that $500 million, but you get eternal life. What are we doing? We're offering a consumer product. It's just better, not different than what the world is offering. That's consumerism.
Well, if we look at it in everyday practical level too, I think our faith sometimes is very consumer oriented. Just think about the way we do church. Where we want to
There you go.
come on. We want to go to places that usually have great program or, have great sermon or, people that we could click with, whatever that may be. I think we often focus on what can I get? How can I get my needs met? Is the primary way that we decide upon the church, rather than what has God called me to do? How can I contribute and be part of this community? So
That's a great illustration. Church shopping, isn't that the language you use? Church shopping, right? Yeah.
it's not to say that you need to find a church where
Right.
you feel is life-giving and that you can grow with. There's a community that you can grow with. It's not to undermine that.
Any other thoughts? I feel like it's getting a little heavy, and so it's Christmas. Merry Christmas, everyone. I can pray, and then we can relax, and we're going to have a nice meal.
I wanted to just kind of challenge you, like I always like to do, because we don't want to just stop here, where it's a great discussion, great teaching. Oh, wonderful, let's go down to lunch and forget it. I'm wondering, there's some of you who takes note, and there are many of us who maybe the Holy Spirit is kind of nudging at you or brought something forward